Hello everybody! In today's video, we're going to be going over Bachmann's HO scale twin locomotives, Donald and Douglas, from the Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends universe. Donald and Douglas are a pair of tendered 060 steam locomotives. They made their first appearance in the books and TV show in an episode called The Brake Van. They both run on the Northwestern Railway doing basically whatever's required of them. They also like to clear snow. As far as personalities go, there are a couple of the good guys on the show. To tell the Scottish twin engines apart, Donald is number 9 and Douglas is number 10. Fun fact, while we know Donald and Douglas mostly from their black paint scheme, in the books they were later painted a royal blue. In the TV series, however, they retained their black paint scheme throughout the series. Like all locomotives from the Thomas and Friends universe, Donald and Douglas are based on real-life locomotives. Donald and Douglas are based on the Caledonian Railway A12/652 class 060 steam locomotive. They made their first appearance around the turn of the 20th century in 1899 and ended production in 1909. They were used for a mix of freight and passenger hauling. They were eventually withdrawn from service between 1948 and 1963. Okay, let's take a detailed look at Donald and Douglas. Okay, before we do our detailed breakdown, because they are twins, let's just give them a quick spin together so you can see them side by side. Douglas is number 10, of course. You can see here their faces are identical because they are twin engines. And as we bring them around full circle, you can see that Donald is number 9. Okay, let's remove one of them and go over the locomotive in some detail. Okay, so Donald will be the subject of our detailed breakdown here. So, as you can see, these Donald and Douglas are tendered locomotives, which means that we have the locomotive and the tender being towed behind. So these locomotives are an 060 wheel configuration, so that means that there are no leading wheels, there are 6 drive wheels, 3 on each side, and there are no trailing wheels on the locomotive. The tender itself is a 6-wheel tender, so you can see that there's 3 wheels on each side. You can see here on this Bachmann locomotive that there's not a ton of detail here as far as like the suspensioning goes, but there's a little bit of brake work here. You can see the brake pads there, and you can see the kind of the black framing here. From the back here, we've got a hook and loop coupler in our buffers with the red bumper and the black bumper pads there you might be able to see in profile. These tenders here are kind of low tenders. They don't come really up as high as some of the other Thomas the Tank Engine universe tendered locomotives. And as you can see right up front, Donald and Douglas both have black paint schemes. The pinstriping on the tender and on some of the elements of the engine here around the cab are kind of nice. It's a 2-toned pinstripe with red and white. And red and white always looks nice on a black paint job. That's always a good color scheme. The number 9 and also the number 10 on Douglas are painted yellow with a little red outline. And you might not be able to see it from here. You'll see it from a top view, but there's a nice coal load there in the back. And then we have a tapered out kind of coal. The top edges of the coal box there on the tender are kind of flared out on 3 sides. And we got a little step here going into the tender, red bumper. But yeah, it's a nice tender there. As far as the locomotive itself goes, we have a couple of details here. We have a little step up here into the cab. The cab has no detail like a lot of the Bachmann HO scale Thomas the Tank Engine locomotives. At this price point, there's no cab detail, so there's just some flat black plastic. We'll see that more when we look at it from behind. But again, that pinstriping, as we said, comes up into the cab here, that red and white on black paint scheme. Really nice. You got a little silver handhold here and a little window. It doesn't really look like a window detail here. There's a little handhold there, it looks like, on the side. As we move along the bottom here, we got the linkage connecting the 3 drive wheels on each side. And we got these little wheel wells here on the running platform, little fenders or wheel wells. And this wheel well here kind of extends out into some kind of a box structure coming to the front of the boiler. On the boiler itself, we've got the nameplates of Donald and Douglas on the number 10 locomotive. It's a red with some gold lettering. And we've got a little silver pipework here going along the boiler. And then on the boiler itself, we've got this kind of strapping molding here. That's, there's one here at where the boiler meets the cab, and then 4 more as you work your way to the front. The roof itself has a little curve to it, and it's got some little detailing in here, some little bracing structures up here on the roof. We'll see that from the top angle. And we've got the train whistle, steam dome, and the chimney up top. And on the front of the running platform here, we've got the front buffers here. The bumper is painted red. The little stems of the buffers are painted red, and then we get the black tips there on the or pads on the buffers, and then a front hook and loop coupler. Not a bad looking locomotive. All right, let's give it a turn. Okay, looking at the back of the locomotive and the tender. So we uncoupled them and put them side by side to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. And we'll look at the back of both. Now remember that for the locomotive, the back of the locomotive is actually, would hook up back here to the front of the tender. Which is why as we begin to look at this, we have 2 different coupler types. On the tender we have the hook and loop coupler because this is the back of a tender and this is what hooks up to the rolling stock. Whereas this tab or this tongue and receiver here on the locomotive hooks to a post on the other end of the tender. So for the tender itself here, there's really not much detail here. The front is kind of a shiny black paint job here, and of course both the locomotives and both tenders, our primary color is black. We've got a nice red bumper here with the black pads of the buffers, utility hook, airline, and like I said, the hook and loop coupler. And you might be able to see from the top, we'll definitely see from the top, but maybe you can see from here a nice coal load in the back of the tender. As we move over to the locomotive, as I said, the coupler here is that kind of tongue type receiver with just a hole to receive the post of the tender. There's just a red bumper here. There's not much detail here to really take in. There's just like a little step here from the cab to the back of the locomotive. But what they do here is they put in, even though there's no detail to speak of, they do put this little round feature here, which gives kind of a visual illusion that you're looking at, the back of the boiler inside the cab, where in a more detailed model you'd see all the valves and levers and things like that on the back of the boiler. So it's kind of a neat trick. For the price point, you don't get a lot of detail on these, but that's certainly a little this is a little bit different than what we've seen in some of the other engines for detail. So I think it's kind of a cool little trick to put the shape of the boiler in the back of the cab like that. Okay, now that we've got the locomotive and the tender coupled up again, let's give it another turn. Okay, looking at this side of the locomotive and tender, it's exactly the same as the opposite side. There's no real difference here, but just to give you a look, it's obviously the paint scheme carries over. One thing about this little sign here for Donald and Douglas is that they are kind of raised. They look like they've actually been attached to the side of the boiler as opposed to being molded in. So that's kind of a cool detail. We'll try to show you that a little bit when we look at the top and the bottom. You'll be able to see that. But there's really not too much to add here as far as describing the detail, just kind of giving you a look from the other side. You get the nice linkage down here and all the other details we went over earlier. So yeah, let's give it another turn. Okay, looking at the front of Donald, we'll start with the tender here. Again, not a ton of detail, but just to take a look. Down here, this is the post that receiver on the rear of the locomotive will hook up to. But you can see the steps here up into the tender, red bumper, and this is just kind of a flat platform here. Again, painted that nice gloss black paint. Coal load in the back. And as far as the front goes, you can see here hook and loop coupler, airlines, utility hook, buffers with the black pads on the front, red bumper. Again, nice contrast. Red always looks good with black, especially the black, red, and the white pinstriping. But you can see here on the front of the running platform, you get a little bottom of the boiler here, kind of slopes down. You've got where this piping comes up the side here on the boiler, it kind of wraps and then comes over the face, which is kind of a nice little element there. And of course, Donald's face. And like all of these Bachmann HO scale Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends universe locomotives, these eyes will traverse back and forth as they're going along the track. You can see the chimney up front here, and then maybe you can see behind it, maybe not, but you get your steam dome back here, and then your train whistles, and then you've got a couple of porthole windows right back here on the cab. Now, a lot of times those porthole windows are kind of painted, they're kind of trimmed out with paint with gold or brass or something along those lines, but this does not have any kind of paint associated to the porthole windows up there, so maybe you'll see them, maybe you won't. I hope you see them. And then, of course, the little slope of the roof there, or the arch of the roof. But yeah, there's Donald and Donald's tender, the front views. Okay, let's give Donald his final turn. Okay, let's look at the top and the bottom of both the tender and the locomotive. Okay, looking at the coal tender from the top, you can see obviously the primary feature here is the coal load in the back. And I don't know if the camera is picking up on it, but it looks like individual pieces of coal. And they have like one or two sides that are kind of glistening. So as you turn it, when you look at it from different angles, it has this kind of glistening effect, which I think is typical of coal, which is a nice detail. Otherwise, you can see here we've just got we got two kind of small little extensions here, little walls here that presumably protect the fireman who's shoveling the coal, or keeps also the coal kind of corralled down here. But it's just a flat kind of platform here. As we turn it this way, again, you can just see those elements in from a top-down profile, buffers, hook and loop coupler, utility hook, airline. And then if the angle is right, you can see where the top kind of flares out at that outward angle there. Cool elemental feature there. All right, let's take a look at the bottom. Okay, looking at the bottom, not a lot of detail down here, but we've got our 6 wheels here. These are metal wheels. There's no electrical connectivity involved with the tender here, but the metal's a wheel just the same, probably to give it some weight and makes a nice sound on the track. You've got your Bachmann stamping here at the bottom, little part number there. And then this is the rear of the tender. It's got the buffers, and this is the hook and loop coupler, which hooks up to all your rolling stock. And then at the other end, we've got the little post that hooks up to the receiver, the little tongue receiver with the hole in it on the locomotive. But yeah, no real detail on the undercarriage here to speak of, but just to give you a look. Okay, looking at the locomotive from the top, we've got the big features here are the chimney or the smokestack up there on the front. We've got these bands here, presumably holding the boiler down onto the running platform. And then we get our steam dome and our whistle feature down here, painted brass. For the roof of the cab, we don't see this on a lot of most of the Thomas Tank Engine Universe locomotives just have kind of a solid piece of smooth plastic going over the cab. But this one here has some features to it. There's a archway here, but then it comes out kind of angles back flat. And then we've got 3 structures here, presumably holding the shape of that, supporting the shape of that roof, if that were a real locomotive, of course. And then again, looking from the top, we get our little silver painted piping running up both sides of the boiler and then wrapping over the top of the face feature. And if you can see here, this is where I was talking about the little placard for the Donald and Douglas names. They have a little bit of kind of depth and texture to them. They look like placards that are attached, and they may be on this model, I'm not sure, but it's better than having it like stamped into the plastic. I think that appearance, that it's a special plaque put on the side of the boilers. So that's a nice feature. Hook and loop coupler up front with the buffers and hook, and then in the back, again, we have the receiver that the tender will attach to. All right, let's take a look at the bottom. All right, looking at the bottom here, again, not a ton of detail. We have some, a little motor compartment here. We've got the screws, access screws, so that you can get in there. If you need to service this receiver here for any reason, you can also take that off with a tiny little screw there. We got the hook and loop coupler up front with a little delicate spring in there and a very tiny screw there for access. And then to remove the body from the rest of the platform here, you've got these other access screws back here. It looks like there's about 6 of them. And the metal wheels. These metal wheels are for connectivity, of course. And then you've got your linkage here. And the running platform is molded in black plastic. And if I didn't mention it, you've got your Bachmann logoing down here on the bottom as well. Yeah, so that is the bottom of Donald, but Douglas is identical because they're the exact same engines. Okay, let's give Donald one more spin. And also keep in mind that Donald and Douglas are both identical engines. Okay, and let's give Donald and Douglas one more spin side by side. Okay, and there you have it, a detailed look at Donald and Douglas from the Bachmann HO Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends collection. Okay, let's take Donald and Douglas out on the layout. And because Donald and Douglas hauled both passenger coaches and freight cars, we'll have them pull a little bit of each.